Alright, welcome back to another video. This one focused, once again, on the Nintendo DS, where I'm going to take you through and show you all of the best settings to get perfect performance on all your Nintendo DS games on your Retroid Pocket 3. Let's get started. Now, as always, I'm using Show as my front end, and for the Nintendo DS, you're going to want to buy this emulator called Drastic. Yeah, I know it costs $5, but it's definitely worth it. Let's go through the settings. Starting here with the video settings, you can see I have frame skip turned off, and for almost all Nintendo DS games, that will be fine. High resolution 3D rendering is on. We'll talk about disabling edge marking later, and I usually have it set to keep the main screen on top. I'll talk more about that as we go through some of these games. All the other video settings are just standard. Not a lot to show here in the audio settings. I do have the latency low to help the quality of the sound. Microphone is turned on. Other than that, really nothing to show. With that out of the way, let's hop out of the emulator settings, back into Show, and then into our first game, which is Advance Wars Dual Strike. I already have a game saved here. That way we can get right into some gameplay instead of going through all of the story and introduction. Although despite that, they really love to talk in Advance Wars, so I'll just be fast forwarding through some of that to get you to gameplay. I agree. Enough lecturing. Let's get to this game already. Now here I do want to point out a feature of Drastic, and it's the way you can lay out the different screens. I like to keep it landscape X to 1, the way you saw where I have one large screen and then one smaller screen, but you have a lot of choices. You can, of course, do 1 to 1, if that's what you prefer, and then it looks like this. I also keep shortcuts on the R2 and L2. On R2, I have a shortcut so that I can switch between having one screen and both. And on L2, I have a shortcut just to switch between the two different screens if I'm using it in single screen mode. But with that out of the way, I'm going to take us back to landscape X to 1. That's just how I prefer playing most of these games because most of them keep less information on one of the screens, and I can just switch that one to the larger one if I really need to see it. Obviously, Advance Wars, even with high resolution rendering, has no trouble running at 60 frames a second, no issues at all. And that's the case with really all of the games that I'm going to be showing you. They all perform fine, although some of them do need settings changes to run at their best. Alright, I hope you've had your fill of Advance Wars. Let's jump into some Burnout Legends. Now, this version of Burnout Legends obviously doesn't compete with the PlayStation Portable version. In fact, this, I think, is a really poor port, but I wanted to show you that 3D games, even if they're poorly made, don't look great, and to be honest, don't play great, still run perfectly on the Retroid Pocket 3. You can see it's maintaining 60 frames per second without any issues. It's just not very good. Next up is Castlevania Order of Ecclesia. With the standard settings that I showed you at the beginning, this game runs perfectly well. Obviously, the map and the item screen are normally on the second screen. You really need to see the map, you can just use your hotkey, pop it up like that. Don't be careless like me, or otherwise you'll end up dead. Now, let's take a look at Dragon Quest IV. I've showed this game before in a previous video, but I wanted to point it out again because it's an example of a game that doesn't work well with the settings I showed you at the beginning. So, let's go in here, into the options, specifically the video options, and the thing you want to change is keep main screen on top. If you turn that off, then Dragon Quest IV will work just fine. Although you can see that when you get into town, it gets a little weird because of the way they lay out screens. You could turn your device this way, swap the screens, and everything would look right, but your controls are going to be a mess, so you're going to have to go into the options, change your button configuration, use just one edge of the system. It's a lot of work, but if you really want to do it because you really want to play Dragon Quest, that's fine. For me, I'm satisfied to just keep it like this, or, of course, you could set it to landscape 1:1 and get an equal proportion on each side of the screen. Now, Dragon Quest V and VI work the same way because they're on the same engine, but Dragon Quest IX is a different story. Here, you have the perfect example of why I like to keep the main screen on top in any game where it will work. See, this game loves to switch which screen is the important one. So, we can fix that by going into the options and setting Keep Main Screen on Top. And then, whether or not we're in battle or out of battle, the primary screen will be the one we've got set to be the larger screen, and we'll just have the information on a smaller screen. As you can see now, when the battle finishes, it doesn't move us over to that tiny little screen, and when we jump back into the battle, we've got all of the graphics that we want to look at on the big screen. Final Fantasy IV, by comparison, has none of those issues. Almost none of the important information is ever on the secondary screen anyway, so as long as you keep the main screen on top, you're going to have no trouble, and you're really almost never going to need to look over there except to check out the map. Final Fantasy IV on the Super NES was one of my earliest RPG memories, and if you've never played this remake, you might not realize that it does now have some questionable cinematics with voice acting. I guess it's a love it or hate it sort of thing.
Where is the noble knight, the man who took me in as an orphan and raised me as his own? The strong, just king I once knew. Is a crystal worth all this?
Forced drama.
Robbing a peaceful people of what's theirs by right. What need could be so great?
So here you can see that unlike the Dragon Quest games, even your fight menus are on the main screen. It's really just your HP and SP on the smaller screen. You can always toggle over to check that out if you really want the details. Now, I know this video is starting to seem like it's incredibly RPG focused, but someone wanted to see Golden Sun, so let's take a look at it. It also gives me a great opportunity to point out another one of those settings. If you take a look right here, around the edge of the character, you can see some black lines, but we can change a setting and get rid of that if we really want to. Just go into the video options and then turn on Disable Edge Marking. And once you've done that, you'll notice those black edges around the characters are gone. It's really a personal preference, what you like, but it is nice that we now have that option. And as with all the other games we've looked at today, this game runs perfectly on the Retroid Pocket 3. No issues at all. And finally, so as not to be completely overwhelmed by role-playing games, let's look at a platformer. This one is Super Princess Peach. I think it looks great on the Retroid Pocket 3 screen, and also it's a game where you really don't need the second screen. You basically just use it to select your mood, and you can easily do that even on the tiny corner screen. And if you really want to read that text, not that it matters much, but hotkey. And that does it for this one. I hope you've enjoyed it, and as you can see, with just a few changes of settings in Drastic, every Nintendo DS game you want to play should work well on the Retroid Pocket 3. And I think, thanks to the touchscreen and the multitude of screen settings in Drastic, using Retroid Pocket 3 is really the best you're going to get, next to a real DS, of course. A lot of you have asked about Pokemon, so I'm sure you're disappointed it didn't show up in this video, but I've never played Pokemon, and when I do, I think it deserves its own video, don't you? So be sure to like and subscribe, and then check back, because you definitely do not want to miss a lifetime gamer playing his very first Pokemon game.